Maybe it was the faintest smell of leather wafting through the air that would always alert the animals. For no matter how quietly I opened the cupboard door, or how deeply they appeared to be sleeping, both dogs would unfailingly come bounding along the hallway and bowl over my 17-year-old frame before my hand had even reached for the leashes hanging inside. The hounds shouldered each other at the front door as they jostled for position. They strained against my one-handed effort to control them, while my free hand motioned to open the latch, and I braced myself for the usual morning sprint down the street. But as I turned the latch, I was struck by a visual flash of a nondescript patch of seemingly vacant land near a fence. I stood motionless for a few seconds, devoid of all thought, my hand still resting on the latch, before the insistent pulling and pitiful high-pitched whimpers from such large male dogs brought me fully back to the moment with a smile. The inconsequential vision was instantly forgotten, and on pulling the front door shut with a slam, I was propelled along the driveway in the usual display of morning madness. Seconds later, though, on reaching the open double gates, I inexplicably came to a sudden jarring halt and braced against the forceful pull of the two dogs as they veered their usual left out onto the street. They were stopped dead in their tracks, and I simply turned right instead and walked on in a preoccupied silence. The dogs were shocked into compliance, and they trotted confusedly alongside me, maneuvering themselves to untangle their own leashes. In that automaton state, I zigzagged through the streets of the housing estate in a succession of left then right turns, maintaining the general northeasterly direction until I reached the main road, which was deserted except for sparse Sunday morning traffic, and I tracked alongside the perimeter wall of the cemetery there. Up ahead was a large roundabout at the intersection with the main drag into the city, a road that was fed by motorways from all parts of the country. I had no idea where I was walking to or why, and can give no reason why I turned left heading towards the city instead of right, which could have taken me on a wide sweep back home. The dog's gait had by now become a lumbering pad, and I walked on for another 800 meters before some semblance of awareness swept across me with a sickening wave of nausea, accompanied by another visual flash of that fence in the vacant land that I'd glimpsed earlier. To my immediate left, a boundary of thick hawthorn hedging was interrupted by an entrance framed by a very tall open gateway crowned with an ornamental lintel guarding a dead straight track that disappeared into an area of vacant land. And on stepping inside, the land to the left carried on as far as I could see, while to the right I could see the fence line to some allotments around 75 meters away. The automaton in me would have compliantly left the main road and tracked along the dense hawthorn hedging to the allotment fence, but my rousing conscious awareness had already begun to regain control. But it was that lingering sense of sickening nausea that guided me to step back onto the main road and hesitantly walk on past the land's forbidding perimeter. 100 meters or so further along, just after crossing a railway bridge, I finally came to a large area of unenclosed playing fields adjacent to the road where I could unleash the dogs, and with a newfound energy, they bounded off. But I was still troubled by the trance-like state that had descended upon me. I was obviously unconsciously looking for something near the allotments and wondered if someone had perhaps dropped a purse or handbag or something of value. It was then that my attention was drawn back across the old rail track that was hidden at the bottom of steep embankments, and I again caught sight of the allotments. In an act that was completely out of character, I skipped a flimsy wire fence and was drawn down the steep embankment, crossed the disused tracks, and climbed up the other side to make my way over to the back fence of the allotments. I knew I was getting closer. I just didn't know what I was getting closer to. The eldest dog, ever vigilant in his duty of care, had already negotiated all obstacles to follow me. But the younger, less savvy dog was barking and whining in helpless frustration from behind the first fence in the playing fields. I surveyed the tapestry of allotments stretching out in front of me, still without a clue as to what was troubling me, and I looked over at the vacant land beyond, torn between going back there and keeping away. I called the older dog to heel and returned to the playing fields, trying to put all thoughts of lost purses and handbags out of my mind. It was the morning of Sunday, October the 2nd, 1977, and I could not have known that hidden in the vacant land's thick perimeter hawthorn hedges, close to the allotments, lay the freshly slain corpse of a young woman. Serial killer Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, returned to Manchester a week later. He had unfinished business to take care of and was again heading for the vacant block of land he'd visited the previous weekend. The crisp, mint-condition £5 note from out of his wage packet that he'd handed over to the prostitute before bludgeoning her to death as she'd tried to climb over the fence into the allotments could easily be traced, and he knew it had to be retrieved. He'd first realised the mistake on his initial journey back home, driving along the motorway connecting Manchester to Bradford in Yorkshire. It had been troubling him all week, and since the body had still not been discovered, he now pulled off the main drag that heads into Manchester city centre and entered the vacant land through the tall open gateway. He immediately turned right and made for the allotments and the dense hawthorn hedge where he'd concealed the body. The body was easy to find, but not so the handbag containing the £5 note that he'd hurriedly thrown in with the body on being disturbed by the headlights of another late-night punter entering and parking up. After dragging the body out into the open again, he scoured the area in a frenzied search for the bag containing the money, but found nothing. So instead, he set about a vicious attack of post-mortem mutilation so that the crime scene would not resemble that of a usual Ripper victim, in a deranged attempt to confuse the police. Then he set off along the motorway back home to Yorkshire, empty-handed. The horrifying scene was discovered by allotment workers the following morning. It would take a further 5 days to locate the handbag containing the note, it being found outside the immediate crime scene, in coarse grass, close to a fence that separated the vacant land from the adjacent tapestry of allotments. Curiously, the bag had been found open, as if searched before being hurled away into the night, an act that Sutcliffe himself, perhaps due to his deranged state, could not recall in his graphic confessions to police. For my part, I could only watch events unfold in the flood of newspaper and TV reports, unable to unburden myself of what I knew. The police would have undoubtedly been far more interested in any young male's presence at a murder scene in those hours following the crime, especially one who could have led them to where the victim's handbag had in fact been thrown. More disturbing for me, though, was that the night before the body had been found, a week after the murder, I had found myself in that other mindless automaton walk into the dead of night, through the meadows, across the bridge, and along the access road until I'd reached the roundabout at the motorway overpass. The same motorway that traverses the north of England and connects Manchester to Yorkshire. And as I stood and listened to the cars passing overhead, I heard a voice that made no sense to me at the time. He's coming back.
You've been listening to Stranger Than Fiction with Daniel Caine. Join us in the next episode as we continue to investigate why the reality we perceive truly is stranger than fiction. For more information, visit www.danielcaine.com.